Okay. There's a couple of more questions I just want to ask you about that. So one, I wanted to ask, does race at all determine how masculinized a woman can get from androgens? Particularly, I'm asking, like, African-American women, do they tend to get less of the androgenic side effects? Maybe because they have less hair follicles on their beard, like males have less beard hair or something. Is that true or not? Not so much. It's even.
Well, I mean, everybody's got a genetic predisposition to respond whatever way they're going to respond. And I think that's a problem that a lot of coaches have, is that they're not willing to spend the time to investigate this stuff. That's why I work with very few people. I never have taken on I have never had more than 20 people at one time getting ready for something. And that was a lot for me, because I like to give a lot of, attention, and I'm much happier with, 10 or less at any given time that are getting ready for a show. Other people who are just kind of like cruising through life and just want to know how to live, a healthy, productive, anti-aging kind of life. That's a whole other story, and they're much easier to deal with. But the competitors, you got to spend a lot of time on them, and they need it. And especially towards the end, especially in the last couple of weeks leading into a show. So I keep that. That's why I don't advertise. Another reason why I don't advertise, I don't want to work that much. So, plus Facebook's better for me anyway. I don't want to get off the track. But so, yeah, African-American women are genetically, really well suited, tend to be really well suited to the body sports, because they have just tremendous, amazing genetic structures that are just incredible. Shanique Grant, that girl's structure is, I don't think Michelangelo could have thought of that shit. I mean, she is amazing. That tiny little waist and her sweeps and that back that goes out for miles in each direction. She is absolutely stunning. That's the luck of the draw, man. You can't take somebody who looks the opposite of that and do anything with that. I mean, there's just nothing you can do to reprogram genetics. So I have found that in African-American athletes, you need way less drugs. You really do. They respond. I'm probably with the political climate now, this is probably racist, but it's not. It's just the way it is. Okay. They tend, in my experience, I've gotten away with far less drugs and have had far less side effects in African-American athletes. But I've also had the same luck with Asian athletes and European and whatever. So I don't think that your race has really as much to do with it as your actual genetics. You can say that African Americans are genetically predisposed to be better athletes, but there's also a lot of obese African Americans waddling around. So I think you're all human. You're the same. I think to the outer fringe of where some of these, athletes lie, the Michael Jordans of the world, that's just the gift from God right there, and I don't think it seems to be racial because it happens to be in the sport where that particular race dominates, and, people make their own conclusions. I just think it's overall genetics. I don't think it's specific to one race or another. I think just the hand you were dealt is what it comes down to.
So one of my hobbies I've been doing for over 10 years is genetic analysis. And one of the things, just to give you an example, when I have someone that's Hispanic, for example, or African-American or East Asian, it's a completely different genotype. I mean, It is completely different. I have actually models that I use for the different types, because otherwise it becomes too confusing. Caucasians cluster together dramatically. East Asians cluster together. Middle Easterners have a lot of heterogeneity. African Americans to some degree cluster together because most of them are sub-Saharan Africans, but then again, North Africans also cluster differently. One of the interesting things that we could speculate on is that obviously African Americans seem to respond much better to androgens, but they also maybe respond better to androgens in terms of muscle. Of course, we have androgen receptors all across our bodies. For example, we have androgen receptors on our heads, which cause us to experience androgenic alopecia. it seems, actually the androgen receptor AR is one of the least studied genes in the human body, but it seems that there is something that is dispersing that androgen receptor differently across the races. So an African-American man may not only respond better to a smaller dose of testosterone in terms of his muscle, but also experience less, for example, hair loss or prostate enlargement or something like that.
Well, what I have found, if I were to deduce it on that level, is that genetically, I have found that African Americans tend to aromatize less testosterone into estrogen and have less estrogenic issues than Caucasians or Asians, for that matter. Actually, Asians seem to be way more sensitive to it than Caucasians. So, in my experience. So, I think that's an issue that people don't kind of look at. That's why I look at blood work. I like to know what's going on, and I don't know how you can possibly coach somebody and with the use of these kinds of drugs and not look at blood work. I mean, that's just the window that you got to look through, So, genetically, and there's genetics, real genetics, and there's genetic stereotypes. Skin thickness, okay? Latin people tend to have a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? And it makes their skin thick. I want to say keloids. Yeah, it's keloids, right? Yeah. Makes the scars thicker, African Americans have that, Latins have it. It makes their skin tends to be very thick. It's really hard to get a close to equatorial Latin and a African American, an African, to get their skin really, really paper thin, like you can an Irish person. And I can take somebody from Ireland with that freckly, ginger skin. Man, I can make them look like I have freaking no skin, but no fat, no skin, nothing. And it's got nothing to do with fat. It's got to do with the actual thickness of the dermal layers, So
that's the Dorian Yates grainy look that happens with very pale. Interesting.
Yeah.
Another thing, actually, Amin Alai, who comes on RX Muscle sometimes, I had a conversation with him once, and he told me he noticed that Middle Eastern people tend to hold more subcutaneous water, which makes sense if you think about it, because a lot of us were desert.
Right.
Dehydrated constantly. But I just want to mention there's a double-edged sword with this genetic predisposition, because also African Americans, obviously reading blood work, that the EGFR has an African American one and a Caucasian one. Many people don't realize the reason for that is because African Americans develop chronic kidney disease at dramatically higher rates than Caucasians.
Yes.
So but then they have to take less androgens.